I lost my baby at 12 weeks. At the family dinner, she smiled and said, "Try harder next time." At 38, I believed I had finally found the life I'd been building toward. My career as a healthcare administrator was stable. My marriage to Christopher seemed solid enough. And after 3 years of hoping, I was finally pregnant. 12 weeks along, not far, but far enough that we'd started whispering about names in the dark. Far enough that I'd created a secret Pinterest board filled with soft grays and whites for a nursery I could already see in my mind. Christopher would rest his hand on my stomach every night before sleep, his palm warm against the small curve that was just beginning to show, and he'd whisper, "Hey there, little one." We didn't know yet if we were having a boy or a girl, but it didn't matter. I'd already bought a tiny onesie that said "worth the wait" in gold lettering, tucked away in tissue paper, ready to surprise both sets of parents once I made it safely into the second trimester. Instead, I woke up on a Sunday morning to find blood on the sheets. I can still feel the exact texture of the bathroom floor tiles under my knees, cold and unforgiving, as I sat there staring at the evidence of what I already knew but couldn't yet accept. That kind of denial wraps around you like a blanket you don't remember reaching for, something your mind does just to carry you through the next impossible hour. Christopher found me there 20 minutes later, and when I told him what was happening, his first words weren't comfort. They were annoyance. His sister Victoria had organized some family gathering that evening, a casual poker night at their parents' sprawling house in the suburbs, and he'd already promised we'd be there. He kept checking his phone while I sat on the edge of the bathtub, my hand shaking so badly I couldn't grip the towel I was holding. At one point, his phone rang and he actually stepped into the hallway to take Victoria's call, his voice drifting back through the door, reassuring her we'd probably still make it, that he just needed to handle something quick. I drove myself to the emergency room. Christopher followed in his own car because he said it made more sense logistically in case one of us needed to leave early. I sat alone in that fluorescent-lit room with its antiseptic smell and the sound of a television playing some Sunday morning cooking show, waiting for the doctor to confirm what my body had already told me. When she finally came in, her voice was gentle in that practiced way medical professionals have when they're about to deliver devastating news. She said the baby was gone, that my body had already started the process of letting go, and that sometimes these things just happen in early pregnancy. I remember nodding, my throat so tight I couldn't form words, and just saying okay, because what else was there to say? Christopher came back into the room still holding his phone, and the first thing he said was, "So we're definitely going to miss tonight then." Not, "I'm sorry." Not, "Are you all right?" Just a statement about the inconvenience of our timing. I didn't say anything. I couldn't. Afterward, I took 10 days off work. I moved into our guest bedroom because I couldn't bear to sleep in our bed where I'd been resting with a small pillow tucked under my growing stomach, where I'd been dreaming about a future that would never exist. Christopher acted like nothing fundamental had shifted. He'd bring me tea and toast but follow it with comments like, "You'll bounce back once we get back into our normal routine," as if losing our child was comparable to recovering from a bad flu, as if grief had a reasonable timeline that aligned with his comfort level. He never once asked me how I was really feeling. He never sat with me in the silence. He just kept moving forward, and I felt myself falling further and further behind, drowning in a loss he seemed determined to pretend hadn't really mattered that much. Then came the family dinner 3 weeks later. Christopher insisted I needed to go, that staying home would only make things worse, that people would start asking questions if I kept avoiding everyone. "It'll look weird," he said, as if perception mattered more than my shattered heart. So I went. I wore an oversized sweater because my body was still playing a cruel trick on me, still looking slightly pregnant even though there was nothing inside me anymore, still producing hormones for a baby who would never arrive. The dinner was at his parents' house, one of those large colonials with too many rooms and too much polish. Everyone was already seated when we walked in. Victoria was there with her husband Marcus and their 4 children, and she dominated the conversation the way she always did, loud and performative, making sure everyone's attention stayed fixed on her. I kept my head down and tried to make myself invisible, pushing food around my plate and counting the minutes until I could reasonably excuse myself. Dessert came out, some elaborate cake Victoria had supposedly baked herself. And just as people were finishing their first bites, she suddenly stood up from her chair with theatrical flair. "Oh, I almost forgot something," she announced, reaching into the large designer purse at her feet. She pulled out a small baby blanket, crocheted in pale blue with white trim, and before I could process what was happening, she tossed it across the table. It landed directly in my lap, settling on top of my plate with a soft weight that felt like it crushed every remaining piece of my spirit. Victoria smiled, that sharp, knowing smile I'd seen her use on people she considered beneath her, and said loud enough for the entire table to hear, "Maybe try harder next time." The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the refrigerator humming in the kitchen. Christopher's mother shifted uncomfortably in her seat. His father coughed and reached for his water glass. His younger brother stared down at the table like he was trying to disappear into the wood grain. And Christopher, my husband, the man who had promised to stand beside me through everything, he didn't say a single word. He just kept eating, fork to plate, mechanical and steady, as if his sister hadn't just emotionally eviscerated his wife in front of the entire family, as if this was all somehow normal and acceptable. I sat there for maybe 5 seconds, though it felt like hours, my hands gripping the edge of the table so hard my knuckles went white. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't throw the blanket back in her face the way every cell in my body wanted to. I simply stood up, grabbed my purse and keys from the side table, and walked out the front door. Nobody followed me. Nobody called out. Nobody said a damn thing. I sat in my car in their driveway for a full minute before I could make my hands steady enough to put the key in the ignition, and then I drove aimlessly for hours, eventually ending up in the parking lot of a 24-hour grocery store where I sat until the sun came up, watching strangers come and go with their carts and their normal lives, feeling like I'd fallen through a crack in reality into some alternate dimension where cruelty was just background noise. The next day, I started hearing things through mutual friends. Victoria was telling people I'd faked the miscarriage. She was spreading a story that I'd never actually been pregnant, that I'd made the whole thing up for attention, that I was jealous of her perfect life with her 4 children and her important job as an assistant principal at an elite private academy. She told women at their church over coffee that I was manipulative and unstable, that I'd always been desperate for sympathy, that Christopher had confided in her about my tendency to exaggerate medical issues. She laughed about it. Someone told me later, actually laughed while describing how I'd performed at the dinner table. One of Christopher's cousins sent me a carefully worded Facebook message saying she felt terrible about what she'd heard, that she wanted me to know she didn't believe the rumors, which was how I knew the rumors had spread far enough to reach people I barely knew. When I confronted Christopher about it, he shrugged. Actually shrugged, like his sister systematically destroying my reputation was just one of those quirky family things you had to tolerate. "Victoria's always been dramatic," he said, not even looking up from his laptop. "Don't take it personally. Don't take it personally." As if there was any other way to take your sister-in-law telling an entire community that you faked the death of your child. I realized then, sitting across from him in our living room while he scrolled through work emails, that he didn't care. These were his people, his family, his sister, and he would rather sacrifice me than create even the smallest wave in their perfect little pond. So I stopped trying to defend myself, and I started paying attention instead. Victoria worked at Meadowbrook Academy, one of those prestigious private schools where tuition costs more than most people's annual salary and parents competed viciously for spots. She loved that job with an intensity that bordered on obsession, constantly posting on social media about her important role, positioning herself as this beacon of educational excellence and moral guidance. But Victoria had always been careless in one specific way. She overshared, particularly in this family group chat she'd added me to years ago when Christopher and I first got married, back when she was still pretending to welcome me into the fold. I'd muted that chat within the first month. It was mostly garbage, endless streams of gossip and memes, and passive-aggressive complaints about coworkers and parents and students. But now I started scrolling. I went back months, then years, reading through thousands of messages with new eyes, and what I found made my stomach turn. Screenshots of her mocking a 13-year-old girl's weight, complete with a photo she'd secretly taken in the school hallway with the caption, "Maybe mom should try buying salads instead of Happy Meals." Messages making fun of a teacher's stained shirt with increasingly cruel commentary about personal hygiene. A long thread where she and two other administrators joked about which students came from trashy families based on their free lunch status. Voice memos of her venting, her words slurring slightly because she only sent these late at night after wine, calling parents breeding cows who think their mediocre spawn deserve special treatment. And then I found the big one, buried in a thread from 8 months ago. A voice message where Victoria bragged about getting a student suspended by lying to the school counselor. She said this 12-year-old boy gave her creepy vibes, so she told the administration he'd made her feel uncomfortable and unsafe, knowing the school's zero-tolerance policy would remove him immediately. I just needed him gone for a few weeks, her recorded voice said cheerfully. Doesn't matter if he actually did anything. The parents are too busy working 3 jobs to fight it anyway. I played that recording over and over, my hands shaking with rage, and I saved the file to 3 different locations. Over the next month, I built a case. I took screenshots of everything, organized by date and category. I documented her Facebook posts that contradicted her professional image, the ones where she claimed to volunteer at homeless shelters and mentor troubled youth, when I knew for a fact she did neither. I made detailed notes with timestamps. I created a folder so thorough it could have been used in court. And then I made a new email account, completely untraceable, with a name that meant nothing. I blurred my own name out of every screenshot, stripped all metadata from the files, uploaded that voice memo about the suspended student to a private link, and sent everything to 3 places: the school board, the local parent association, and the church where Victoria played the role of devoted Christian servant every Sunday. I didn't add threats. I didn't add commentary. I just let the truth speak for itself. 2.5 weeks later, Victoria was fired. Christopher found out the same day it happened. He came home from work looking shaken, standing in our kitchen staring at his phone, and said, "Victoria's in serious trouble. Someone leaked her private messages." I was making dinner, chopping vegetables with careful precision, and I didn't respond. Later that night, after he'd spent an hour on the phone with his hysterical mother, he turned to me and said, "You should reach out to her. She's devastated. She needs support right now." I looked at him then, really looked at him for the first time in weeks, and I saw him with complete clarity. This man who'd sat in silence while his sister humiliated me, who'd made excuses for her cruelty, who'd dismissed my grief as inconvenient, was now asking me to comfort the woman who told the world I faked my baby's death. That night, I packed 2 suitcases and left. I didn't leave a note. I didn't explain. I just walked out while he was in the shower, loaded my car, and drove to my younger sister Hannah's apartment across town. She had a spare room with just a mattress on the floor and a closet full of winter coats she never wore, and it was the first place I'd felt safe in months. I didn't tell many people I'd left Christopher, only the handful who already knew how bad things had gotten. He texted a few times over the next week, asking when I was coming home, increasingly annoyed that I wasn't responding. Then he left a voicemail that said, "We need to talk about this like adults, not children." That's what he called it. Adults. But adults don't sit in silence while their wife gets destroyed at a family dinner. Adults don't watch their sister annihilate someone's reputation and then say, "She's just dramatic." He never once apologized. Not once. Instead, about a week after I left, he sent me a photo. It was the baby blanket, the one Victoria had thrown at me, now folded neatly on our bed, positioned on my pillow like some kind of statement. There was no caption, no message, just the image. As if I was the one who'd overreacted, as if I'd abandoned him over something trivial. That same week, Victoria launched a full assault online. She posted vague but pointed statuses about jealous, unstable women who destroy innocent lives with lies. She shared photos of her children with hashtags like blessed and real mothers and God's plan, the implication crystal clear to anyone who'd been following the drama. She positioned herself as the victim of a cruel smear campaign, a good woman brought down by someone else's vindictive jealousy. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. Other people did. Sharon, a woman from their church who'd apparently had her own run-ins with Victoria, commented on one of her posts. Interesting perspective from someone who called her students trailer trash in the group chat. Then a mother whose daughter attended Meadowbrook wrote, "Are you going to fake another story the way you faked that boy's suspension?" The comments multiplied. People who'd been quietly uncomfortable with Victoria for years suddenly felt brave enough to speak up, and her carefully constructed image began to crack and splinter. 3 weeks after Victoria lost her job, her husband Marcus filed for separation. I don't know all the details, but rumor had it he'd found text messages on her phone, messages to a male colleague at the school where she'd mocked his younger sister's autism, making jokes about dealing with the family retard at holiday dinners. He moved out, took their 4 children, and filed for primary custody. Christopher blamed me for all of it. He showed up at Hannah's apartment one evening, didn't call first, just appeared at the door looking self-righteous and angry. Hannah answered, took one look at him, and didn't invite him in. He asked to speak to me. I walked to the doorway and said, no. He actually looked shocked, like he couldn't comprehend that I might refuse him anything. You've made your point, he said, his voice dripping with condescension. Can we go back to normal now? Normal. He wanted normal. Normal was me crying alone in a guest bedroom while he made dinner plans. Normal was Victoria mocking my miscarriage while an entire table of people pretended not to hear. Normal was my husband treating me like an inconvenient problem rather than his wife. Normal was being erased and dismissed and gaslit until I questioned my own sanity. No, we were not going back to normal. I filed for divorce the following week. That's when things truly escalated. Christopher didn't just want to fight the divorce, he wanted to destroy me in the process. He hired an aggressive attorney and demanded half of everything, including assets I'd brought into the marriage, things that had nothing to do with him. My car, which I'd bought years before we met. My grandmother's jewelry, which had been passed down through 4 generations. Even the savings account I'd built up working overtime shifts as a nursing supervisor before I'd ever met him. His legal filings claimed I was emotionally unstable and impulsive, that I'd experienced a mental breakdown after the miscarriage and was now acting irrationally, trying to punish him and his family for imagined slights. He painted me as vindictive and unhinged, a woman who'd lost touch with reality. He forgot that I kept receipts. I submitted a sworn affidavit with copies of all the hospital paperwork from the miscarriage, the ultrasound images showing the fetus with no heartbeat, the doctor's notes documenting the procedure, the discharge papers. I included text messages where Christopher had written things like, just tell people you're fine and move on, and I don't think we need to keep talking about this. My sister Hannah had recorded him one night when he'd been drinking, not knowing she had her phone on the table, and you could hear him clearly calling me useless, saying I just laid around the house waiting for people to feel sorry for me, instead of getting over it. I submitted that recording to the court. The judge was not impressed with Christopher's narrative, but Christopher wasn't done. He enlisted Victoria to help him, and she threw herself into the role with enthusiasm. She started new rumors, more elaborate ones this time. She told people I was sleeping with my divorce attorney, that I'd forged all the screenshots I'd supposedly leaked, that I'd somehow hacked her phone and doctored her messages using sophisticated software. She even tried to file a police report claiming I'd engaged in digital harassment and stalking, but she had zero evidence and the investigation went nowhere, especially because by that point the state's education board had opened their own inquiry into her conduct at Meadowbrook Academy. Everything she did just made her look more desperate and more guilty. Then I got a message from someone I didn't know, a woman named Claire who said she used to work at Meadowbrook. She'd seen the news coverage about Victoria's firing and felt compelled to reach out. What she told me changed everything. Claire said Victoria hadn't just been cruel to students, she'd actively covered up serious misconduct. A male teacher in his late 30s, someone named Derek Hollis, had been caught messaging a 14-year-old girl on Instagram, messages that became increasingly inappropriate over several weeks. When the girl's older sister discovered them and brought them to the administration, Victoria had personally handled the situation. She'd called the parents into a meeting, told them it was all a misunderstanding, that the teacher was just being friendly and mentoring the girl, and that bringing it to the school board would unnecessarily damage everyone's reputations. She'd pressured them to drop it, and they had, because they trusted her authority. Claire had proof. She'd forwarded herself an email at the time because something about the whole situation felt deeply wrong. In the email, Victoria had written to Derek, delete everything from your phone and your computer. Keep your mouth shut. This goes away if nobody makes noise. Claire had left Meadowbrook a year later, unable to stomach the culture there, but Victoria had stayed and gotten promoted. Now Claire wanted to know if I wanted the email. I told her yes, and suddenly I had something more powerful than screenshots of mean comments. I had evidence of Victoria protecting a predator. I didn't use the email immediately. I read it dozens of times, trying to comprehend how deeply corrupt Victoria truly was, how far her need for control and appearances had taken her. The email was brief, just a few sentences, but the implications were staggering. Victoria had known about a teacher engaging in inappropriate contact with a 14-year-old student, and instead of reporting it, instead of protecting that child, she'd silenced it to avoid controversy. Claire told me she'd kept the email all this time because she'd known eventually someone would need it, that Victoria's cruelty would catch up to her. While I was processing this information, Christopher was still making my life hell through the divorce. He'd gone quiet for a brief period, and I'd thought maybe he was exhausted, maybe he was ready to just settle and move on. But he'd actually been working behind the scenes. A mutual friend messaged me to warn me that Christopher had been telling people I was mentally unstable, that I'd fabricated evidence to destroy his sister's career because I was jealous of her success and her children, that I'd threatened self-harm to manipulate him into staying in the marriage. None of it was true, but lies spread faster than corrections ever do. The next week, a process server showed up at Hannah's apartment to deliver papers. Christopher had filed for an emergency mental health evaluation, claiming I was a danger to myself and others. I had to appear in court just to prove I wasn't insane. It was one of the most humiliating experiences of my life, sitting in front of a judge while Christopher's attorney read text messages I'd sent completely out of context. They quoted a message I'd sent Hannah that said, "I don't feel like being here anymore," presenting it as evidence of suicidal ideation. They conveniently left out that the complete message was, "I don't feel like being here anymore tonight. I think I'll just stay at mom's instead of going to that party." The judge dismissed it quickly, but the damage was done. I realized then that Christopher and Victoria were exactly the same. They didn't just want to win, they wanted to obliterate me, to erase me so completely that no one would ever believe my side of anything. So I stopped holding back. I took everything Claire had given me, the email, the names, the dates, and I organized it meticulously. I combined it with all the documentation I already had, and I contacted 2 local journalists who'd covered Victoria's initial firing. They'd both written about the scandal at Meadowbrook, and I knew they were still following the story. At first they were cautious, but once they saw Derek Hollis's name and read Victoria's email telling him to delete evidence, they called me back within 2 hours. They said they wanted to run the story but needed to verify everything independently. I gave them permission to contact Claire. I provided screenshots of Facebook posts where Victoria had publicly praised Derek Hollis, calling him a vital part of our school family and an educator who truly cares. I gave them links to old school newsletters featuring his photo alongside glowing quotes from Victoria about his dedication. And then I made one more decision. Claire had given me the name of the student Derek Hollis had messaged, though she'd made me promise never to contact the girl directly. I didn't. The girl was 16 now, still processing her own trauma, and I wouldn't dream of intruding on that. But I found her mother through an old Meadowbrook Parent Association directory. I sent her everything I had, every piece of documentation, Claire's email, the timeline, all of it. I told her I had no agenda except the truth, that her daughter deserved justice, and that Victoria had silenced the justice to protect the school's reputation. The mother didn't respond to me, but 1 week later, she went to the police. Then everything exploded beyond anything I could have orchestrated. The article dropped on a Tuesday morning. The headline read, "Former assistant principal accused of covering up teacher's inappropriate contact with student." It didn't name the victim, but it named Victoria. It named Derek Hollis. It quoted extensively from Victoria's email. It included statements from Claire and 2 other former teachers who came forward after reading the initial draft, teachers who said they'd witnessed Victoria prioritize the school's image over student safety on multiple occasions. The article went viral within hours, spreading across parent groups and education forums and local news sites. By Wednesday afternoon, other parents started coming forward. One mother said her daughter had mentioned feeling uncomfortable around Derek Hollis years ago, but the school had dismissed it as a misunderstanding. By Thursday, Meadowbrook Academy issued a public statement announcing a full internal investigation. Derek Hollis was placed on administrative leave. Victoria's teaching license came under review by the state board, and on Friday, the church where Victoria had been so prominent, where she'd taught Sunday school and led women's groups and positioned herself as a moral authority, released a statement saying she was no longer welcome in any leadership capacity pending the outcome of serious allegations against her character. On Saturday morning, Victoria showed up at Hannah's apartment. I was inside making coffee when I heard pounding on the door, aggressive and unrelenting. Hannah looked through the peephole and went pale. Victoria was outside screaming my name, her voice raw and furious, pounding on the door with both fists. Hannah called the police immediately. By the time they arrived 10 minutes later, Victoria was gone, but the neighbors had seen everything. One of them had filmed part of it on their phone. That night, I received an email from an address I didn't recognize. The message was brief, just 4 words, "I hope you rot." No signature, but I knew exactly who'd sent it. And for the first time in months, I smiled. After Victoria's breakdown at Hannah's apartment, I started locking my bedroom door at night. I didn't think she'd actually come back, but I also knew people like Victoria don't retreat when they're cornered, they attack harder. 2 days later, I walked out to my car in the morning to find all 4 tires slashed. Hannah's car was parked right next to mine, completely untouched. The cuts were clean and deliberate, deep gashes across each tire that made the intent unmistakable. The police took a report, photographed the damage, but told me without cameras or witnesses there wasn't much they could do. I didn't need a conviction. I knew it was her. Christopher didn't respond when I sent him photos of the damage. Radio silence. He was still trying to maintain his image in court, still playing the reasonable, stable spouse who just wanted an amicable resolution. But I'd started noticing cracks in his legal filings, small inconsistencies, claims that would quietly disappear after my attorney challenged them with evidence. He was losing ground and starting to panic. Around this time, the education board formally requested to interview me. They were building a comprehensive misconduct case against Victoria that would determine whether she'd permanently lose her teaching license. I met with them in a sterile conference room and showed them everything I had. The screenshots, the voice memos, Claire's email, Victoria's old blog posts where she'd bragged about being the boss behind closed doors and joked about removing bad apples from the school quietly before they rot the whole barrel. The board members took notes for over 2 hours. They told me the investigation could take 6 months to a year, but they were thorough and they were serious. That was fine with me. I had nothing but time. The following week, Christopher's attorney sent a surprising offer. They wanted to settle immediately, no more hearings, no more property disputes. Christopher would withdraw all his financial claims if I agreed to sign a non-disparagement clause that would legally prevent me from publicly discussing him, Victoria, or their family ever again. When my attorney read me the terms, I actually laughed out loud. They were terrified. They wanted to buy my silence because they knew more truth was coming and they couldn't control the narrative anymore. I rejected the offer. I told my attorney I'd rather let every single detail play out in open court than give them the satisfaction of silencing me one more time. And then I did something small, maybe petty, but it felt necessary. I uploaded a photo to a private Instagram account I'd created solely to document everything that had happened. The photo was the one Christopher had sent me, the baby blanket folded on our bed. I captioned it, "He sent me this 2 weeks after his sister mocked my miscarriage." Just a reminder that sometimes the silence is worse than the words. I didn't tag anyone. I didn't name names. But enough people had been following the story, and by the next morning the post had over 1,300 likes. Strangers commented, women sharing their own stories of loss and betrayal and families who'd failed them when they needed support most. Someone shared it to a Reddit forum about surviving toxic relationships. Someone else posted it to Facebook. And then another message arrived, this one from a woman named Jasmine who was 19 years old and had graduated from Meadowbrook 3 years earlier. She said she'd seen all the news coverage about Victoria and wanted me to know something that had haunted her for years. Jasmine said Victoria had bullied her relentlessly in 7th and 8th grade. Jasmine had severe social anxiety and wore noise-canceling headphones in the hallways between classes to manage sensory overload. Victoria had mocked her for it, called her weird and attention-seeking in front of other students, and once physically took the headphones away and refused to return them, saying Jasmine needed to act normal or leave. Jasmine said Victoria had made her cry in front of her entire English class during a presentation, criticizing her stutter and suggesting maybe she should get professional help for that problem before trying to speak publicly again. When Jasmine had a panic attack in the bathroom and a friend brought her to the counselor's office, Victoria had threatened her with suspension for disrupting the school environment and attention-seeking behavior. Jasmine said nobody had believed her at the time because Victoria was always smiling at parent events, always performative in her care and concern. The adults trusted her. The system protected her. And Jasmine had spent the last 5 years thinking maybe she deserved it. Maybe she really was too sensitive. Maybe Victoria had been right. Reading Jasmine's message, I felt something shift inside me. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. This was about taking away Victoria's ability to ever hurt anyone again. There was one last thing I hadn't shared yet, something I'd been saving for the precise right moment. 3 years ago, on the night of Christopher's birthday party, Victoria had sent me a long message on Facebook. She'd been drunk, too much wine after a fight we'd had earlier in the evening because I hadn't laughed at one of her jokes. The message she'd sent me at 2 in the morning was cruel in its honesty. She'd written, "You're lucky Christopher even married you. You're plain, weak, and boring. But that's probably exactly what he wanted, someone who wouldn't threaten me. And don't worry, I'll always be more important to him than you are." I'd never responded to that message. I'd screenshot it, saved it, and tried to forget it existed. But now I had a plan, and this time it wasn't about screenshots or leaked emails. It was about making sure Victoria's entire carefully constructed world collapsed the same way mine had, from the inside out, piece by devastating piece, until there was nothing left but rubble and regret. I knew Victoria loved two things more than anything: power and perception. She'd built her entire identity around being important, being respected, being the golden child who could do no wrong. Losing her job had damaged her, but it hadn't broken her. Not yet. So I made sure her world disintegrated the way mine had, slowly and completely, until there was nothing left to salvage. I started with her children, not by hurting them, never that. I would never harm children, but by making sure the truth reached the people responsible for their well-being. I took everything Jasmine had told me, along with statements from 3 other former students who'd come forward after reading the articles, and I passed all of it to the school district's Parent Advocacy Coalition. My friend Rachel, who served on the board, included a detailed summary in the monthly newsletter without naming Victoria directly, but every single parent in the district knew exactly who it was about. The assistant principal who'd mocked students with disabilities, who'd called children ugly and stupid, who'd protected a predator to avoid paperwork. Victoria's name became poison in our community. Parents actively requested their children be transferred out of any program she'd ever touched. The church officially removed her from the women's ministry and banned her from teaching Sunday school ever again. Her carefully curated friend group, the other mothers who'd once competed for her attention, quietly unfollowed her on social media and stopped inviting her to playdates and birthday parties. Even her own mother started making excuses to avoid seeing her, embarrassed by the scandal, humiliated by the attention. And then Victoria's ex-husband Marcus filed for full custody of their 4 children. The family court granted it temporarily based on the growing documentation of Victoria's instability, her violent outburst at Hannah's apartment, her increasingly erratic online behavior, and the serious professional misconduct allegations. Victoria lost her children. She lost her house a month later when she couldn't make the mortgage payments, blacklisted from every private school in the county, unable to find work even as a substitute teacher. And Christopher, my husband who'd started all of this by staying silent at that dinner table, he was next. When I'd initially left Christopher, I'd taken only what I absolutely needed. But once the divorce turned vicious and he started fighting dirty, I stopped holding back. I gave my lawyer everything. The text where he'd told me to stop crying the night I'd lost the baby, where he'd said I was milking the miscarriage for sympathy. The video Hannah had recorded of him mocking me while drunk, laughing about how I couldn't even keep a pregnancy going for 3 months. The screenshots of him standing by silently while Victoria spread lies about me, even encouraging her in private messages, saying I deserve to be taken down a peg. The judge heard all of it during our final hearing. The prenup Christopher had insisted on before our wedding, the one where he'd promised it was just a formality, actually worked in my favor because it clearly delineated what he'd brought into the marriage versus what I had. I kept everything I'd earned, everything I'd saved, everything that was mine. He walked away with almost nothing. But the real damage came from somewhere I hadn't expected. His boss's wife, Patricia, had been following the entire saga online. She was horrified by what she'd learned, particularly the parts about Christopher's treatment of me after the miscarriage, and she made her feelings known. Christopher's company quietly restructured his position right out of existence 2 months after our divorce was finalized. He tried to find new work, but word travels fast in professional circles, especially when your personal life becomes public spectacle. Now he was unemployed, living back in his childhood bedroom at his parents' house, and from what I heard through mutual acquaintances, Victoria blamed him for everything. She told anyone who would listen that if he just controlled his wife better, none of this would have happened, as if I were some misbehaving pet rather than a human being who'd been pushed beyond all reasonable limits. But I still wasn't finished. There was one final piece I needed to put in place, one last truth that needed to see daylight. That Facebook message Victoria had sent me 3 years ago, the one where she'd said Christopher only married me because I was plain and weak, where she'd gloated about always being more important to him than I was. I posted it. Not out of spite, though I won't pretend that wasn't part of it, but because people needed to see who Victoria really was when she thought no one was watching. I posted the screenshot to a private support group I'd joined for women who'd experienced pregnancy loss, a group with over 8,000 members, a group Victoria used to lurk in pretending to be supportive while probably gathering material to judge people. I wrote a simple caption. This is what she said to me the night I lost my baby. She was supposed to be family, and they both let me grieve alone. Within 90 minutes, the post had been shared beyond the private group. Women tagged local news outlets. Others sent it to bloggers who covered stories about abuse and institutional failure. The screenshot went viral in a way I hadn't anticipated, not because it was particularly shocking compared to everything else that had come out about Victoria, but because it was so nakedly cruel, so deliberately designed to inflict maximum pain. It was proof that her malice wasn't accidental or stress-induced. It was fundamental to who she was. 2 months later, a reporter from a regional investigative journalism site contacted me. They were working on a comprehensive piece about abuse of power in private schools, particularly examining how administrators sometimes protect predators and punish vulnerable students. They'd been following Victoria's case and wanted to do a deeper profile exploring the patterns of her behavior over her entire career. They asked if I'd be willing to speak, anonymously if I preferred. I said yes, and I gave them everything. Every document, every recording, every screenshot, Claire's email, Jasmine's story, the accounts from 4 other former students who'd finally found the courage to come forward. The article took 3 months to write and fact-check. When it finally published, it was devastating. The headline read, "The assistant principal who weaponized her power, inside one private school's decade of institutional failure." My name wasn't mentioned, but Victoria's was, along with her photo, not the polished professional headshot she'd used on LinkedIn, but a recent picture of her walking out of a courthouse trying to hide her face from cameras, looking haggard and defeated. The article detailed everything: the bullying, the cover-up, the cruelty, the systematic abuse of power. It included quotes from 6 former students, 3 former teachers, and a damning statement from Derek Hollis's victim's mother about how the school had failed her daughter. It included Victoria's own words from those voice memos and screenshots, her mockery and contempt preserved forever in print. The article spread across education forums, parent groups, and social media. It was picked up by national outlets. Education policy experts started using Victoria's case as an example of why private schools needed better oversight and accountability. Her name became synonymous with everything wrong with insular, elite institutions that prioritize reputation over student welfare. And that was the end of Victoria's power, permanent and complete. Her teaching license was permanently revoked by the state board. She was banned from working in any educational setting in our state. Her name became ungoogleable without triggering pages of results about her misconduct. She'd built her entire identity around being important and respected in education, and now that world was closed to her forever. I don't feel proud of everything I did. Sometimes, late at night when I can't sleep, I wonder if I went too far, if I became the vindictive monster they accuse me of being. But then I remember sitting at that dinner table, feeling the weight of that baby blanket in my lap, listening to the sound of forks scraping against plates while an entire room full of people looked away and pretended not to see my devastation. I remember Christopher's silence, Victoria's smile, the way they both treated my grief like an inconvenience they were entitled to mock. I remember how they tried to destroy me when I fought back, how they called me crazy and unstable, how they weaponized my trauma against me. And when I remember all of that, I don't feel guilty anymore. Not for speaking up, not for fighting back, not for refusing to be silent while they lied about me, not for making sure the truth came out, even when the truth was ugly and painful, not for watching everything they built collapse brick by brick, consequence by consequence, until there was nothing left but the rubble of their own choices. They left me to grieve alone, isolated me from support, tried to convince everyone I was the problem. Now they understand what real grief looks like. Now they know what it feels like when your whole world falls apart and nobody is coming to save you. I still have that baby blanket. I keep it in a box at the back of my closet, not because I want to look at it, not because it brings me any comfort, but because it reminds me of something I'll never forget. Silence is its own kind of violence. When good people say nothing, when families protect their own at any cost, when institutions choose reputation over truth, that silence does real damage. It destroys lives. It enables cruelty. It tells victims they don't matter as much as everyone else's comfort. I will never be silent again. I will never let someone else's cruelty go unanswered just to keep the peace. And if that makes me vindictive in their eyes, if that makes me the villain in their version of the story, I can live with that. Because I know the truth, and more importantly, now everyone else does too. The divorce was finalized 8 months after I left. I got everything I'd asked for. Christopher got nothing except his own clothes and the car that was in his name. The judge wasn't sympathetic to his claims after seeing the evidence of how he'd treated me, how he'd enabled his sister's cruelty, how he'd tried to use the legal system to punish me for leaving. I heard through Hannah that he eventually found work at a different company, several states away. Took the job partly to escape the reputation that followed him here. His parents stopped speaking to Victoria entirely, blamed her for tearing the family apart, though they never once apologized to me for their own silence that night. I don't care anymore whether they feel guilty. Their opinion stopped mattering to me the moment I walked out of that dinner. Victoria, from what I understand, moved somewhere south, to a small town where nobody knows her story. She works retail now, or at least she did last anyone checked. No more power over vulnerable students. No more authority to abuse. No more platform to hurt people from. Just anonymity and the knowledge that she destroyed her own life through her own choices, that every single consequence she faced came directly from her own cruelty. I hope she thinks about it sometimes. I hope she lies awake at night the way I did, wondering how everything fell apart, except she doesn't get to claim she was blindsided. She knew exactly what she was doing every step of the way. As for me, I'm rebuilding. I moved into my own apartment about a year after the divorce, a small one-bedroom with big windows and space for plants. I went back to therapy, working through not just the miscarriage, but everything that came after, learning how to trust again, how to set boundaries, how to recognize red flags before they become catastrophes. I'm dating someone new now, someone kind who asks how I'm feeling and actually listens to the answer, someone who understands that grief doesn't follow a timeline and healing isn't linear. We're taking it slow, and that feels right. I think about the baby sometimes, wonder who they would have been, what they would have looked like, whether they'd have had my eyes or Christopher's laugh. I let myself feel that loss now without shame, without anyone telling me to move on or get over it. I named the baby River, a name that works for any gender, a name that means something flowing and eternal. River exists in my heart even though they never got to exist in the world, and that's enough. Some losses don't heal, they just become part of who you are, woven into your story in ways that change its shape forever. What Victoria and Christopher never understood What people like them never understand is that you can't build a good life on cruelty and silence. Eventually the foundation cracks. Eventually the truth comes out. Eventually you have to face what you've done and who you really are when nobody is watching. They thought they were untouchable, protected by family loyalty and social status and institutional power. They thought I was weak because I was kind, that I was easy to break because I loved deeply. They were wrong. Strength isn't about who can inflict the most damage. Strength is about who's still standing when the smoke clears, who rebuilt from nothing, who refused to let cruelty have the final word. I'm still standing. They're not. And every single day I wake up in my quiet apartment with my plants and my peace and my hard-won freedom, I know I made the right choice. I know speaking up was worth it. I know fighting back, even when it was ugly and painful and cost me things I loved, was necessary. Because the alternative was letting them win, letting them silence me, letting them continue hurting people while everyone looked away and pretended not to see. I couldn't live with that. I can live with being called vindictive by people who never had to face what I faced. I can live with being the villain in their story if it means I'm the hero in my own. And if you're reading this, if you've ever been in a situation where everyone told you to just let it go, just keep the peace, just be the bigger person while someone destroys you, I want you to know, you don't have to be silent. You don't have to protect people who hurt you. You don't owe loyalty to systems or families or institutions that failed to protect you. Speaking up isn't vindictive. Fighting back isn't wrong. Demanding accountability isn't cruel. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do for yourself is refuse to carry other people's cruelty in silence. Sometimes justice looks like consequences, and consequences look like everything falling apart for the people who thought they'd never have to face what they'd done. I don't know where Victoria is now, not exactly, and I don't spend time looking. I don't check Christopher's social media or ask mutual friends about him. They don't exist in my world anymore except as cautionary tales, examples of what happens when you choose cruelty over compassion, when you prioritize appearance over authenticity, when you think you can hurt people without ever being held accountable. They're ghosts now, irrelevant to my present and absent from my future, and that's exactly where they belong. The blanket stays in the box. The memories stay in therapy, and I stay focused on the life I'm building, the one where I never again accept silence as a substitute for love, where I never again mistake cruelty for strength, where I never again let someone else's comfort matter more than my own survival. That's my story. That's what happened when I decided I was done being quiet. That's what victory looks like when you're fighting not just for revenge, but for the simple, radical act of being believed, of having your pain acknowledged, of making sure the truth matters more than keeping up appearances. Was it messy? Absolutely. Was it painful? Every single day. Would I do it again? Without hesitation. Because at the end of the day, I can look at myself in the mirror and know I didn't just survive what they did to me. I made sure they could never do it to anyone else. And that matters more than any amount of peace I could have bought with my silence.